Number 10, one less eye. That's right, kicking off the list at number 10, we have a Spider-Man moment that gives me goosebumps every time I see it. We start now with Spider-Man, the Other, Evolve or Die, where we see Spider-Man get his eye ripped out. Yeah, Morlun put Spider-Man through quite the battle, but ultimately it ended with his eye being a midnight snack. Spider-Man even compared being hit by Morlun to being hit by the Incredible Hulk, saying how he's never been hit so hard in his life. He has no idea it's about to get so much worse. And before we continue, if you guys haven't done so already, please make sure to go ahead and give us a like, because it helps us out a bunch here at the studio. It's this one. Thanks a lot. Okay, now back to Peter Parker's awful life. Number 9, Man Spider. We've all wished at some point or another that we could have Spider-Man's powers. I mean, the wall crawling alone I would take. So useful. But what if you got more than you bargained for power-wise? Well, in Spider-Man Disassembled, we see this in a pretty gross way. Peter starts to become an actual spider, starting with growing an extra set of peepers. Yeah, so that's disgusting. But wait, there's more. He ends up becoming an actual spider. Yeah, so after being injected with this goop from the Spider Queen, not only does he grow some extra eyes, but he also gives birth to another Peter Parker. Yeah, you heard me correctly. So out comes Peter, and he's the same Peter Parker as before, but a little stronger, with maybe a hint of PTSD sprinkled in there. But that's not particularly new to Peter. Bonus points to Peter also for attending a wedding with the 2 extra eyes and not being noticed. Gotta love Star Trek themed weddings. Get away with everything. Number 8, Venom. Making its debut in Amazing Spider-Man 299, next up on the list we have the introduction of Venom. Venom is a symbiote from the Clintar race, and after making its way to Earth, it eventually wound up in the hands of course, Spider-Man. So this dark symbiote started to make Spider-Man's life better. I mean, he got a cool haircut, started standing up for himself, and the suit made him stronger. It just felt better. But this didn't last too long because the symbiote found its ideal host shortly after Peter ripped it off, and that being Edward Brock. Eddie had visited Our Lady of Saints Church to beg God for forgiveness before ending his own life. And then this alien symbiote bonded with him mentally and physically. Like I said, at this time Peter was there trying to get rid of the symbiote because it was doing more bad than good in his life. Now because it had originally bonded with Spider-Man, he basically is another Spider-Man, kind of. He gets the same powers Spidey used and also some of the same memories. It's actually why Eddie Brock knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Fun little fact. This ended up creating one of Spider-Man's best villains, and we get to see Tom Hardy reprise the role of Venom in the not so near future. Number 7, Tony Stark's death. With rumors swirling around about the next Spider-Man movie being one within the multiverse, it's only fair to go back and look at some of the sad themes of Spider-Man Far From Home, with of course being the death of Tony Stark. So right off the bat, we see Peter struggling with the weight of the world, having everybody look at him as the new leading Avenger. With most of our other Avengers off-world, Spider-Man facing Mysterio couldn't have been more grueling. This poor kid even gets slammed by a train at one point. It's easy to say this is a time where Peter could for sure go without. Reconnecting with lost friends, dealing with much older classmates like bad boy Brad, who doesn't make the first year back in school easy for Peter at all. That plus Tony Stark's inventory just being handed off to him, that's a lot of responsibility. The kid's going through a lot of pressure and puberty too. I mean, probably. What a combo. And number 6, the affair. Gwen and Norman's affair, to be specific. This is an absolute nightmare of an issue, so of course we're throwing it in here. We go now to Sins Past, which was this 5-part story that revealed that Gwen Stacy had actually had an affair with Norman Osborn. And they had kids named Gabriel and Sarah. So he meets them in a pretty wild way. We're introduced to these 2 twin characters, these new mysterious characters, and one of them really resembles Gwen Stacy, like by a lot. So Spider-Man 509, this begins, and it starts with a letter from a dead Gwen Stacy. So Peter starts to analyze the situation and the letter, and eventually finds out the secret that even Mary Jane knew about. So 7 months before Gwen's death, she gave birth to these twins with Norman. But because of Norman's blood, they aged a lot faster. And this wasn't taken too well by comic book fans, as this was written out pretty fast. Still an awful time for Peter, I'd say. I mean, even Mary Jane knew about it the whole time. So many secrets, so little time. Number 5, Doc Swap. This is a body swapping story that might make you pretty uncomfortable. So we go now to the Amazing Spider-Man 700, where we find a dying Dr. Otto Octavius. So Octavius switches bodies with Spider-Man, so that Spider-Man would die in his body and then he would live on inside the body of a superhero and do some good. Not a bad plan. Now the best part of this is that Peter was still inside, a little bit. He was able to remain inside the body and could only communicate with the new webhead, Otto Octavius. It's like your subconscious just talking to you the whole time. It was pretty neat to see this version of Spider-Man as well. And after a few minutes with the new, younger, healthier body, donned himself the new name, the Superior Spider-Man. And number 4, parents are back? Yeah, this one's pretty neat. So right off the cover of this, we see the text, "The most cataclysmic events of Spider-Man's life begins in this issue." And that's probably enough to pull you into the issue. I mean, come on. So we find out that Peter's parents have returned from the dead. So in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 365, we meet them again. Peter comes home and Aunt May's like, hey, I'm here with our new guests. And Peter's like, oh, new guests, those are always fun. Are those my parents? Yes, Peter's parents had returned from the dead. Well, rather they had never died to begin with. Let me explain. So they went on to explain how they were alive and working for Red Skull in secret for years. Only it was later revealed that they were evil androids the whole time. So his robo-parents were actually collecting some intel about Peter to give back to Chameleon. Chameleon created these fake parents for Green Goblin. So many lies. Just a web of lies. Spider-Man web of lies. Now we get it. And number 3. Gwen Stacy's death. This one left average moviegoers stunned in theaters when The Amazing Spider-Man 2 hit the big screen. We finally see the death of Gwen Stacy, and it's beautiful. So of course this comes from the comics, specifically in issue 121 of The Amazing Spider-Man. The Green Goblin ends up dropping her off the Brooklyn Bridge, and although Peter has his trusty webs, sometimes the angle just doesn't quite work out, and Gwen's neck ended up snapping from the momentum. So this happened in the movie as well, and Eagle Eye fans could spot the clock tower in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 striking 12:10, which references issue 121. And the way the web shot out like a hand too, I mean, really? Right in the heart. This scene's amazing. I mean, of course it's really sad, but the music, the way it's shot, really drives this part home. I mean, it's sad that this scene was one of the last ones we got from Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man run. Sure, the movies weren't as good as the new installments, but it would have been nice to see where this Spider-Man went after this dark moment. Would have been pretty dark. We'll never know. I mean, maybe multiverse stuff. We'll see. And number 2, identity not so secret. If you stuck around until the very end of Spider-Man Far From Home, you were treated to a pretty sweet teaser. So of course we see J.K. Simmons reprise his role of J. Jonah Jameson in what starts out as a pretty comical scene. Now of course we're happy to see him back in this Spider-Man universe, but he comes bearing bad news. He ends up showing leaked footage from the final battle with Mysterio, and in the footage we see him shout out Spider-Man by his secret identity, Peter Parker, and a nice little photo to go along with it too. Now this isn't the first time this has happened. Back in the comics before the Civil War storyline, Peter takes a page out of Tony's book and reveals his secret identity to the world. And after that, things go south quite fast, including a hired gun setting his aim on Aunt May. And finally, number 1, you guessed it, Uncle Ben's death. Of course we have to include this in the list and save it for last. We had to sit through this in theaters like numerous times. And that's for good reason. One of the biggest moments of Peter Parker's life was when his Uncle Ben died. Now, after letting a thug out of his sights, that thug ended up being the one to take his uncle's life. So not only did Peter, of course, feel saddened by this very close loss, especially not having parents to begin with, but he was responsible for letting this guy get away. He honestly let it happen, and then in Amazing Fantasy issue 15, we see it all unfold. So after a police officer asks Spider-Man why he let the crook get in an elevator and make a break for it, Spider-Man responds with, "Sorry pal, that's your job. I'm through being pushed around by anyone. From now on, I just look out for number 1, and that means me." And cut to bam. Kicking off the list at number 10, Buried by Kraven. In the storyline, Kraven's Last Hunt, published in 1987, it has quite an interesting illustration on its front page. We see a dark Spider-Man crawling out of a grave with the tombstone reading, "Here lies Spider-Man." Weird, what's going on? This 5-part series, of course, as you would guess, centers around the death of Spider-Man. So Kraven is frustrated after his failed attempts to catch Spider-Man, so he comes up with this plan and seemingly shoots him dead. So Kraven buries him, and even worse, he takes Spider-Man's suit and takes his place. So now, Kraven's roaming New York and brutally attacking criminals, including a group that was assaulting Mary Jane. So then 2 weeks later, Peter wakes up from the effects of the tranquilizer and digs himself out to freedom. Then when Spider-Man confronted Kraven, Kraven was like, "No way, buddy, I'm the real deal. I'm doing this hero gig now, not you. Get out of town. Beat it, mister." And Kraven releases Vermin, which is just a great character. So he attacks Peter thinking he was the same Spider-Man that had given him a beatdown before. So then Peter has to now convince Vermin otherwise. Vermin is actually about to kill Peter until Kraven intervenes. Talk about a bad couple of weeks. Yeesh. And before we continue this list, guys, if you haven't already, make sure you toss this video a thumbs up because it really helps us out here at the studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to Spider-Man's horrible life. Number 9. Clones. The Clone Saga wasn't loved by fans. I mean, for starters, it actually lasted way too long. The Clone Saga began in 1994 and lasted until 1996, and it carried out through every single Spider-Man comic. So that entire time you were reading the issues, you were also forced to keep up with this dreadful clone plot that just wouldn't stop. And on top of that, there were these new characters and plots that were coming in every issue that it became almost a chore to retain interest. The story was set to end in Amazing Spider-Man 400 in 1995, but those early issues of the Clone Saga did so well with sales, so they decided to drag it on. One of the worst parts about all this was that fans had to find out that Ben Reilly was intended on being the real Spider-Man after all of this, and the Peter Parker we've been following for years was actually the clone. So naturally fans weren't having it, and they ended up retconning this again so that Peter was Spider-Man and Ben was still the clone. I mean, what a headache to explain, let alone be forced to read for years. And the worst part of the bunch being maximum clonage. This issue, that's when it goes the worst. So check it out, or don't. Number 8, best friend problems. It's always incredible to me when a superhero has a bully. Like, it always happens. And I mean, sure, it's a nice message to audience members not to be a bully. You know, you never know what battle somebody else is fighting at home. And it's usually a nice reveal. Like, Flash Thompson is more of a lighthearted bully in the new Spider-Man movies. He kind of looks up to Spider-Man, but he doesn't look to Peter Parker. It's a fun dynamic to play with. So when we meet Harry Osborn and see his arc, it's pretty wild. Harry initially wasn't a fan of Peter Parker in the first place. He thought he was a snob. But then he realized Peter's distance was actually due to his aunt's health problems, and the two of them ended up becoming good friends. In the 2002 Spider-Man film, we see the beginning of a best friend becoming the villain, and this time propelled by jealousy. And it was a nice relationship to see on screen. It added a lot to the film. We have James Franco playing Harry Osborn in the original trilogy, and by the time the third one rolls around, Harry is a full-on villain, sporting the new alter ego, the Green Goblin, taking the place, of course, of his father, Norman. Harry and his father's relationship was never easy breezy, even before Norman became a supervillain. So Peter was helping Harry get through problems with his father, and Spider-Man was fighting the Green Goblin. So we were treated to these layers of who knows what, and all these dynamic relationships playing in with each other. And it's what made the first Spider-Man movie so good. In the comics, when Peter and Norman finally figured out who each other really was, Norman suffered from amnesia after the fight. So Peter made up this story about how Norman was actually injured while he was helping Spider-Man fight the Green Goblin. Not a bad save. So Peter went to the hospital to check up on him, you know, see how things were going. And then Harry saw this as a sign that the two of them were friends. So sometimes your bestie gets close to you, sometimes they try and kill you with their dad's glider. You get what you got. And coming up at number 7, hit by a train. In Spider-Man Far From Home, we see Peter go toe-to-toe with Mysterio, a villain fans have been begging to see on the big screen for years. And Mysterio does a pretty good job convincing Peter that what he's seeing is real. But what Peter doesn't expect is a real-life train to hit him going really fast. There have actually been conversations online about how this hit should have killed Peter. He got hit by an Ice 3 bullet train, and one Reddit account went so far as to actually do the math on how Peter should have died with the speed and the momentum of the train. Also, that's a lot of effort. Just lie to us. Say he would have been fine. Don't tell us he would have died. Not only does this hit injure Peter, but once he slowly climbs onto the train and collapses, he's taken like almost 2,000 kilometers away to the Netherlands, where Happy has to pick him up in a field of tulips. This was a great part in the movie. I mean, seeing him lose everything and barely obtain the strength to go back and fight Mysterio again, you love to see it, but you also hate to see it, you know? And number 6, extra arms. The Spider or the Man. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 100 back in 1963, the issue begins with Peter Parker wanting to dismiss his abilities. I mean, I'll take them. If you don't want them, just toss them this way. Thanks. So he comes up with a solution and takes a swig. For Gwen, he adds, before downing this mix. And as we could have guessed, it doesn't go well, because it's on this list. So by the last page of the issue, we see Peter as he ends up growing 4 extra arms. Not like this, he says. No, it's happening, buddy. So the next issue focuses on Peter as he tries to get a solution for this new, not so handy problem through Michael Morbius's blood. So with the new Morbius movie with Jared Leto coming out, could we possibly see Tom Holland sport the new 6-arm look? Part of me hopes not, but I mean, anything Tom Holland does is gold, so I'm here for it. And number 5. More girl problems. Peter and his human life alone could be a sitcom. In one trilogy, we have Mary Jane as the love life, and then in Garfield's movies, we have Gwen Stacy. How many girls does Spider-Man have in these comics? Well, that's a tricky question because Spider-Man and Peter Parker are very different people. They're perceived differently by others, specifically Black Cat. So Black Cat, being a known burglar, is met by Spider-Man in the night, and she knows he's at minimum attracted to her, right? Physically. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 194, we see the two of them get pretty flirty and even exchange a kiss. But when Black Cat finds out who Spider-Man really is, she's less interested. Gotta play it cool, Pete. Play it cool. Keep the mask on. Less talking, more masking. And number 4. The Deal with the Devil. The One More Day storyline is next up on our list. This is a 4-issue story, but because of delays, it took 5 months to conclude. That's a lot of waiting. I mean, we're still waiting for the Black Widow movie to come out, so I mean, it's not too bad in comparison, but still, any wait sucks. The story began in 2007 in Amazing Spider-Man issue 544, and instead of the usual thugs or enhanced scientist villain, we see Spider-Man make a deal with the devil. The devil, of course, being Mephisto. So after Spider-Man revealed his identity in the Civil War storyline, people of course were after him, now knowing his true identity. So after a bullet strikes Aunt May instead of Peter, he of course feels like he's the one to blame. Even the opening of the story shows Aunt May in a hospital bed with Peter talking about how she was perfectly fine just a few days before. Like, it's dark right off the bat. So he first goes to Iron Man and gives him being the one who convinced Peter to reveal his identity in the first place. So he webs him up and gets all cool and bad cop. And it's nice to see, but it's also heartbreaking because that bullet was meant for him. Peter is feeling the guilt, and cue Mephisto. Yeah, the devil shows up and offers a deal to Peter while Aunt May is currently dying. So MJ adds to the pitch. So basically what happens is that the world will now forget about Peter's identity. Great. Aunt May will live. Neat. But the kicker is that MJ and Peter never got married. It's kind of like Shrek 4, except worse. So they hug one final time, and MJ explains that their love was always meant to be, and that whatever Mephisto does is unstoppable. And then poof, the deal is sealed. The next day, Peter's like, oh man, another uneventful night, just the way I like it, me being Peter Parker, not married, and all that jazz. And all the backstory just like that was wiped out at the turn of a page. Number 3, the death of Spider-Man. When a supervillain escapes, it's not a good time. Usually they're coming back for that person that put them there in the first place. Ultimate Spider-Man's death is absolutely beautiful and super saddening. It's done really well. So after tackling Captain America and literally taking a bullet for him, Peter is left to fight the Green Goblin and a few other bad apples that are out for revenge. And this entire climax happens in Peter's neighborhood. So everybody's watching. Everyone's running around trying to figure out what's going on, trying to get to safety, and he's limping around, tossing out quips, pulling off fire hydrants, and using Electro's current to like hurt everybody else. It's amazing. This is the plot that I think we'll actually see in the next Spider-Man movie in a way. So with all these villains now knowing Peter's true identity, we could get them all showing up to his house, just bringing the battle to him. Let's just hope it doesn't end the same way, with Peter's heroic demise, that is. Number 2, Curtis Connors. It's always fun giving one of your favorite teachers a hand in a project or something, but I mean, giving them a hand literally could end up pretty bad. In the comics, Dr. Kurt Connors lost his arm due to an explosion in a war and started to spend his life researching on new ways to grow it back. Hence the lizard growing the tail back thing. You got it. So once this finally happened, there were a few side effects. We see his arm grow back, but then as we see in the Amazing Spider-Man movie, Dr. Curtis Connors also becomes a full-on lizard. I mean, sure, lizards can grow their tails, but when you add that in with a human driven by rage and mixed DNA, the brain can alter as well. And his story arc begins with Amazing Spider-Man 6, and it's really cool. Especially if you've seen the movie, if you haven't quite read the comics, this is a nice little backstory that they didn't explain too much. And finally, at number 1, He gave MJ cancer. You heard me. In Spider-Man Dark Reign, we learned a lot what Spider-Man's powers can do. The ability to climb walls, amazing. Shoot webs, ha, how fun. But when it comes to reproducing, his DNA might just be too problematic. The story takes place 30 years in the future in an alternate universe, Earth 70237. Peter ends up visiting the grave of MJ and discovers the real reason that she died. The radioactive cells in his sperm ended up giving MJ cancer. Yeah, that's what? Peter had the choice of staying with her when she was dying or attend gunshots outside as Spider-Man. He left her, and when he came back, she had already passed away. Super sad. This made Peter vow to never become Spider-Man again. It's a pretty dark story, and the whole giving MJ cancer thing, I mean, I hope we never have to relive that on the big screen ever. Not even anytime soon, just never in general. That would be great.
Number 10. Stopped a train with his body. In the second Spider-Man film starring Tobey Maguire, Spidey goes through some burnout after losing MJ to John Jameson and having his friendship with Harry Osborn fall apart. During this time, he's lost his spider powers and he gets attacked by Doc Ock. After an intense battle, the Mad Doc leaves Spidey to rescue a rogue train heading off of the rails. Pete, having already taken off his mask, puts himself directly in the line of danger and is stretched to the point of nearly breaking in two as he gives everything he's got to stop the train. The effort leaves him battered, bruised, and barely conscious, and in a touching moment, the citizens of New York move him to safety and return his mask, swearing that they won't tell a soul. It's a touching tribute to Spider-Man's sacrifice, and it definitely looks pretty painful. Hey Nerd Squad, if you like these videos and you want to see more, take a second to hit that like button and ring that notification bell. We really appreciate it. Number 9. Got dragged off to fight in another dimension. This version of Peter Parker has it pretty rough. When he was a boy, his parents died in a car crash, and his Uncle Ben was highly abusive. In his anger, he adopts the name Charlie Parker instead of Peter. He's a problem child, and he spends 2 years in a juvenile detention center. By age 13, he's living on his own and using his abilities to steal from drug dealers. If that's not bad enough, he's later recruited into the Superior Spider Army, picked up by Ashley Barton, and dragged off to fight in an alternate universe where the Earth is irradiated, without so much as an introduction or an explanation. They're just like, let's go, no time to explain. This version of Spidey is pretty grumpy, and it's easy to see why. Regular Pete already has a hard time, but this guy got dealt a seriously crappy hand. Still, having spider powers does seem pretty awesome. Number 8. Got beaten to near death by the Phoenix Four. The Avengers vs. X-Men event was epic and mind-blowing, featuring some crazy showdowns between our favorite heroes. In A vs. X Volume 1 Part 7, Spider-Man plays a big role as he trains with Hope Summers, trying to help her learn how to control the Phoenix Force. As she grows frustrated that the fight is escalating and she hasn't been able to help, Spidey tries to reassure her that her time will come. Ironically, it's Spider-Man's time that comes later, as he covers the escape of his fellow Avengers by distracting those who are controlled by the Phoenix Force. Despite him having no chance, Spidey gets up again and again after he's beaten to a pulp, likely suffering multiple broken bones while rescuing his friends. It's a real display of heroic sacrifice from everyone's favorite wall crawler. Number 7. Became a heartless killer and died. Introduced in What If Spider-Man vs. Wolverine in 2008, Assassin Spider-Man is a serious dude. This version of Spidey becomes an assassin that works alongside Wolverine, which sounds super awesome and not like one of the worst things to ever happen to him. However, he eventually becomes kind of jaded, with no qualms about killing and just doing whatever it takes to get the job done. Worse still, this version of Pete doesn't even make any quips or crack jokes like the Spidey we know and love. He literally has a gun in his web shooters. He is eventually recruited into the Spider Army, but later he tragically dies. Still, not the worst thing to happen to Spider-Man. Number 6. Turned into a lizard beast and then died. In this universe, it was Gwen Stacy who was bitten and received spider powers, and the experience had a profound impact on Peter Parker. Pete idolized Spider-Woman and was desperate to be like her. So desperate in fact that he experimented on himself in a scene that goes horribly wrong, and he's transformed into a terrible lizard-like creature. He shows up in this form at the Midtown Senior Prom, where he does battle against Gwen. After a serious beatdown, Peter returns to his human form, but he still dies from his injuries. Being dead has probably got to be one of the worst things that's happened to Peter, but it's not as bad as all the suffering that some other versions of Spider-Man go through. Number 5, became a werewolf. This version of Spidey appears in Marvel Zombies Army of Darkness Volume 1. He doesn't really have a large role or anything, but being transformed into a werewolf has gotta be a new low for Spidey. In the comic, we see him with big old wolf ears and big hairy arms ripping out of his costume, and it is not lit. Can you imagine Werewolf Spider-Man swinging through the moonlit sky chasing you down to eat you? Yikes. The werewolf web-slinger and his fellow superhero werewolves ravage the world and eat Galactus, later chasing after Ashley Williams when he appears in this universe. Number 4, killed by Thanos. Is there anything worse than ceasing to exist? When Thanos performed his legendary snap with the Infinity Gauntlet, literally half the universe was wiped away, but I was too busy worrying about Spidey to even comprehend the destruction. Seeing Spider-Man disappear like dust on the big screen was seriously heart-wrenching for a lot of people, but it also spawned a generation of hilarious memes, perfectly balanced as all things should be. Luckily for us, these events are undone eventually, but man, there's nothing like seeing Spider-Man die to sober you up. Number 3, became one of the 4 Horsemen of Apocalypse. This has actually happened to Spider-Man on 2 different occasions. Once in Cable and Deadpool number 15 in 2005, and then again in Avengers Volume 4. In these 2 stories, Apocalypse unleashes his master plan for world domination, which includes recruiting 4 people he finds fit to be his Horsemen of the Apocalypse. The 2010 version is especially horrifying, with Spidey being horribly mutated into this hairy white beast, seemingly fused to a horse-like creature that looks like it's made of webbing. Being used by evil bad guys is bad enough, but being turned into a hideous monster for that is definitely not Spider-Man's finest hour. Number 2, been the last person alive on Earth. This version of Spider-Man is actually Ben Parker, in an alternate reality where he received spider powers when he accompanied his nephew Peter to a science demonstration and was bitten by a radioactive spider. Ben decided to use his powers to help others, but retired after his nemesis, the Emerald Elf, discovered his identity and killed his wife and Peter. Later on in life, Ben is approached by Ezekiel Sims, who warns him of the imminent arrival of Morlun, devourer of totems, on a mission to destroy all spider-folk. Ezekiel allows Ben to hide in his bunker under Sims' tower, and while he's there, the whole city of New York and presumably the world is subjected to nuclear destruction. He only emerges from the bunker later when the other spider totems arrive in the universe to enlist his help. He is reminded by the OG Spider-Man of his own advice about great responsibility, and he suits up one last time to help the Spider Army. It must have been really lonely just sitting around in that bunker though. Damn. And here we are at number 1. Turned into a zombie and ate Mary Jane and Aunt May. This one is just seriously messed up. So in this story, a zombie virus is infecting heroes like Luke Cage and Hawkeye, and eventually Spider-Man as well. After being bitten by Colonel America, Spidey takes a punch that dislocates his jaw, and then in this fight realizes the level of destruction happening all across the city. He realizes in the moment he's gonna have to go save Mary Jane and Aunt May, so he just bails, swings off to go and save them ASAP. Unfortunately, he does show up a little too late, and the zombie virus is already working its way through his body. When MJ approaches, he lashes out and bites her, and as she turns into a zombie, Pete sets to work on Aunt May. Ultimately, we are treated to this horrifying scene in which Spidey holds up Aunt May's severed head and screams at it. Yeesh.
Number 10, drugged and tortured. Classic. Those are 2 things you never want to happen to you, in that order either. Age of Ultron was an event that went down in 2013, and I gotta tell you, nothing is worse than waking up and realizing you slept past your alarm. You feel panicked, you feel all hot in your chest, you feel stupid, and you still feel tired. Worst of all, you don't even get any more rest. It's just stress and anxiety all in one ball. But how about sleeping through the end of the world? Yeah, that's right. That's exactly where Peter Parker's story begins in all of this Ultron madness. He wakes up and the world is in ruins. Desperate to help and find answers, he hits the streets, only to be drugged and kidnapped by Ultron's goons. He then waited, badly beaten, to be sold to Ultron. So it's bad, it's getting worse and worse. So after a daring rescue from Hawkeye, the team actually is frustrated with Hawkeye and Peter. Tony walks over to use some tech just to make sure he's alright, but in doing so could potentially compromise their secret location. Damn you, Tony even says to him. Sad. Imagine if Tony said damn you to you. you'd be like, oh, please. And before we go on to number 9, guys, if you could go ahead and toss us a thumbs up, because it really helps us out here at our studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. Okay, back to some sad Spider-Man times. Number 9, Aunt May. This time a little bit different, but still the same. So with Miles Morales breaking the internet more and more every day with Spider-Man 3 rumors, and of course the Spider-Man Miles Morales game, it's fair to look back on the saddest part of that first PS4 game. Peter is faced with the ultimate hero scenario. If he uses the antidote to save Aunt May, there won't be enough to save everybody else from the Devil's Breath bioagent. And it's really well done. I mean, many gamers, including myself, definitely shed a tear at this point. My throat got tight. I was like, hey, skip, I don't want to see it.
What if we use it to cure someone right now?
Then there won't be enough to cure the others.
So when the game was being made, interestingly enough, the big ups didn't want them to kill Aunt May at first. But then once they saw the flow of the story and how things were playing out, they simply said, you can kill Aunt May, you've earned it.
You earned a pardon.
Number 8, Bike Messenger.
Why, Peter, you're bleeding.
Oh, yeah. I stepped off a curb and got clipped by one of those bike messengers.
Yeah, for sure, a bike messenger did that to your arm, not razor blades made by the Green Goblin. Yeah, so this dinner scene is anxiety central. Similar energy to when Michael Keaton's Vulture is grilling Peter on the way to the dance. Yeah, that injury is one of many in the Spider-Man trilogy, but it's the location of the injury that gets Peter in the most amounts of trouble. Right on his arm, front and center. It was this moment where Norman Osborn realizes that he's Spider-Man. If only you sat on his left, would have been smooth sailing. Come on, man, you have senses. Your right is my left, you gotta flip it, here you go. Number 7, impaled from a glider. So in the movie, it's a well-timed backflip that ends up taking out Norman Osborn. And the best part is, Norman does that to himself. He's like, and then he goes, whoo, and gets it. It's awesome. His own glider kills him. What a life lesson right there. Don't be a dick. So stupid. Like no one's there, I'm like, sorry. Well, in the comics, it went down a little bit differently. See, Ben Reilly was a clone, of course, created by the Jackal, and went by the name of the Scarlet Spider. And it was him who in fact got smoked by this glider, causing his death immediately afterwards, revealing that Ben Reilly is indeed the clone. Number 6, he loses a leg. I have a great arm and leg joke at the end of this one. Here we go. It took me an hour, I'm like, that's it. Peter Parker, this time from Earth 982, aka the MC2 universe. So after a battle with the Green Goblin, Peter ends up losing his entire left leg. So this happened about 2 years after the birth of his daughter, May, and the incident was so horrific for Peter that he quit. Yeah, he stopped being Spider-Man, which is sad. But then cut to many years later, May Parker grows up and puts on the suit herself. And she looks pretty badass. We love the MC2 universe. So while Peter is walking around with a fake leg and a cane, she's swinging around busting arms dealers. Too bad she didn't run into any legs dealers. Number 5, rocked. Okay, we've seen Thanos throw a moon at the Avengers. We've seen him snap away half of the Avengers and half of all living creatures, in fact. But hand to hand, the Mad Titan is still brutal. If you look back now on the Infinity Gauntlet event, this was a wild ride. I mean, Wolverine's bones turn into rubber, Cyclops gets smothered by a clear block, Iron Man gets his head cut off. It's violent, it's spicy. And then Spider-Man, we see him get a face full of rock. Yeah, Traxia straight up beats him to death and then finishes him with a rock. That's some like caveman stuff right there. I mean, at least Thanos made the deaths of the other Avengers somewhat quick. I mean, come on guys. I feel like if I had to pick one way to go with Thanos, I would much rather be turned into dust than having a rock here. This is already messed up enough, we don't want that. Number 4, he exploded. Yeah, so we touched on Marvel Zombies in part 2 or 3 or 1. We lose track here, okay? Spider-Man's had a rough go. But in Marvel Zombies Return, we see Spider-Man after he gets transported to another world. Classic. But this time, the field trip goes dark when Spider-Man realizes he's in the past. So there's a lot of zombie stuff on the up and up. So the zombie Spider-Man in this world ends up having some of Sandman's crew for lunch. So Sandman gets out of Dodge, right? But upon doing this, he bumps into the Spider-Man and he's like, oh, you again, you're not eating me, buddy. And then Sandman puts himself into Spider-Man's mouth, which is kind of like eating him, idiot. Which already, worst case scenario, to have that much sand in your mouth. And then to make things even worse, Sandman then grows and moves around until he explodes out of Spider-Man. like a gender reveal balloon. It's like, pah, it's sand. Just kidding, it's sand.
Yeah. You made a delicious sandwich. So did you. Very crunchy.
Number 3, he was crucified. That's right, in X-Men issue 191, we see our boy Pete on the front panel with the words Raiders of the Lost Temple written at the top. See, this issue is a lot of fun for everybody, but of course, Spider-Man. The issue begins with the Avengers and the X-Men trapped in this world where Kulan Gath has made everything a little bit old-fashioned, like very old-fashioned. His spell turned cars into horse-drawn carriages. It turned guns into swords, which way more fun in my opinion, and police officers turn into civic guards. The whole city becomes medieval times. It's insane. Then Spider-Man gets crucified and tortured, even admitting that he didn't think it would be possible to hurt so much. And Gath's barely begun. Yeah, he was upset. Honestly, he was one issue away from Ramsay Bolton walking in and calling him Reek instead of Pete. Going for the Game of Thrones fans, there you go. Number 2, he dies. Again. Sometimes dying is just the way to go, especially if it's loud and heroic. Maybe you're like on your knees, you're yelling, you're ripping your shirt off or something cool, some kind of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson way. You gotta do what you gotta do, even if that means dying alone with nobody to witness you being a badass. And that's exactly what happens in the story at the hands of Thanos. So once again, Thanos doesn't actually end the Spider's life in this issue. It's his own heroic actions that puts the nail in the coffin. He's going over the mental checklist of things to do. You know, classic Spidey things. Pick up Mary Jane, fill up on web fluid, deliver some mean-ass barbecue sauce to Aunt May's, the usual. And when a couple workers fall off the side of a building, Peter even acknowledges that it's another walk in the park for him. That is until the cooling machine explodes, sending Spider-Man hurling in the air. Now, seconds before his heart stops, he reflects on the fact that he always made jokes in dire times, then simply coming to realization that there are no more jokes. And crash, the barbecue sauce breaks off the ground as Spider-Man dies. Really sad, a weird barbecue sauce twist, but it actually made it seem more sad, I don't know. But it gets worse. Just wait, there's more bad. Death isn't the end, especially in Thanos' case. He meets Peter Parker and then makes him watch as the mother he tries to save yells in agony over the loss of her child. So not only did Spider-Man get himself killed trying to save the two, but he didn't even save the kid. Bad luck Brian over here, come on. Number 1. Let It Ring. Remember that song? It was great. Well, it's so good, man. Apple bottom jeans, boots with the fur. Alrighty, we'll finish off this list with one of my personal favorite moments of the Spider's horrible run with luck, maybe because I'm claustrophobic and this one triggered me. You've been warned. Spider-Man 300. There's a huge brawl with Venom and Spider-Man, and it's a lot of fun, right? A lot of webbing, a lot of punching and kicking and thwips. And at the beginning, Spider-Man is trying desperately to reach the Fantastic Four's Sonic Blaster, right? Just one little pew, and we're good. Eddie Brock is doing his villain monologue stuff, and Spidey's like, yeah, keep talking, and he's trying to reach his blaster, and then Brock notices and slams him through the floor. Then Venom knocks him out, and then Spider-Man wakes up upside down. Yeah, he's webbed up to this giant bell. So when the clock strikes midnight, that heavy clapper, it's gonna kill him. It's gonna get him right in the head. It's kind of like Saw, in a way. It's really twisted. So in a last-minute attempt, Peter barely manages to squeeze his hand out, stopping the bell from ringing. But of course, it's not easy. It's only time before the constant hitting will crush the bones in his hand. And he acknowledges this too. He knows that he's in a sticky situation. After barely escaping, the bell does finally ring. And if Peter sticks around, he too would die along with Venom. So even if you win, you lose. That's life. That's how life goes. Sometimes you're stuck between a bell and a hard place. Literally.
Number 10. Ant-Man. After Brian Michael Bendis took over the Avengers, he decided to shake things up a bit in order to create a new main roster for the team with the Avengers Disassembled story. In this story, we saw the Avengers mansion and many teammates killed when the corpse of Jack of Hearts shows up at the mansion randomly, urging the Avengers that he brings a message of warning. Scott Lang moves towards Jack just as he explodes, destroying the mansion and killing Lang. We later learned that this was all Scarlet Witch's doing, who at the time was beginning to lose her grip on reality due to her famous psychotic break, which of course would later lead to the events of House of M and later on M-Day. Number 9. The Wasp. Near the end of Secret Invasion, Janet Van Dyne was taken out, and of course no one was expecting that as it was near the end of the event, and all in all it was kinda random. It's revealed in issue 8 of Secret Invasion that Janet herself was turned into a biological weapon by the Skrulls, who were able to get her a new growth hormone posed as a gift from Hank Pym. But of course it wasn't Hank, it was a Skrull disguised as Hank. Janet obviously took this new growth hormone, which she was told would allow her to turn from giant size to microscopic like that. What it truly did was turn her into a giant biological weapon, attacking everyone around her, Skrull and human alike, until she finally began to shrink down and she died. Number 8. Hellcat. A pretty crazy turn of events led to Patsy Walker's death in the 90s, when comics was pretty much nothing but a crazy turn of events. After seeing the darkness of her husband Damon Hellstrom's soul, or Hellstorm as he was known then, Patsy was driven insane. She became a shadow of her former self, railed thin and babbling non-stop about Damon at all hours. Meanwhile, in Hellstorm Prince of Lies issue 14, Damon seems to be off having a fine old time while this is going on. In the end, Patsy's desperation to be at peace brought a being known as Death Urge to her. This being was there to help Patsy pass, which apparently was what she wanted. He kills her pretty gruesomely by driving a spike through the back of her head. Yikes. And she has to go fight people in hell for a bit. That's how it goes. Number 7. War Machine. During the events of Civil War II, we all knew we were going to need a catalyst for the war, but I don't think anyone would have expected that it would be War Machine's death that would have got us there. During a conflict with Thanos that Ulysses the Inhuman predicted, Rhodey died. A single and brutally direct punch from Thanos was all it took. Even with his armor, War Machine didn't stand a chance. At this time, he was dating Captain Marvel, and Carol, believing his death could have been avoided, started to try and get people to listen to Ulysses' visions and react before their events could come about. Whereas Tony Stark cautioned against trusting the visions and suggested they simply react to events as they happened. This is what basically started the war, and while many were surprised and sad at Rhodey's death, fortunately he would later come back to life following Tony Stark's own resurrection from a comatose state following the conflict. Number 6. She-Hulk. Recently in Empire number 4, She-Hulk was revealed to have actually died back in Empire 1. In Empire issue number 1, Shulky is given a hammer by the alien plant race of the Kotati. The hammer is said in combination with Kotati meditation techniques to help She-Hulk channel her rage, restoring her brilliant mind to her. How nice, you might think. But we later learn that the Kotati are actually the bad guys in this situation, and it's later revealed during her off-panel adventure where she's supposedly given this hammer and taught techniques that she was actually killed by the Kotati so they could use her body as a weapon and as their own vessel. She transforms into a plant monster, and in a flashback we witness Jennifer Walters' fate as it's quickly summed up that yes, she died. What was so shocking about this death was that it was kinda just skipped right over. We learn of the death and then it's kinda on to the next thing. Like, it's no big deal. Making you wonder if you really read what you just think you read. But yeah, you definitely did. Number 5. A Death in the Family. You might be thinking, but wait a minute, shouldn't we have seen this one coming at least? During the unfolding of a story involving Jason Todd's Robin leaving Batman's side and searching to find his birth mother, writers at DC allowed the fans to decide Todd's fate. Jason Todd had proved to be more unpopular in his role as Robin in comparison to the former Robin, Dick Grayson, and writers figured they'd let the fans decide whether Jason Todd remained as a character or was permanently wiped out. Killed. In the end, the votes were close, but the majority said that Jason Todd should perish. So, he did. What shocked many fans is that DC actually followed through, and this death was also pretty gruesome. Apparently, many fans who actually had voted thought it was a ruse, and so had not put too much consideration into their vote, assuming DC would never actually follow through with it. Letting the fate of Todd be decided by a fan poll even shocked Frank Miller, who commented that he thought it was the most cynical thing DC had ever done. Number 4. Heroes in Crisis. One of the more shocking superhero deaths to happen recently in DC was the massacre at the superhero mental rehabilitation center, The Sanctuary. This happened in the limited comic book series Heroes in Crisis. Many lost their lives in the massacre, including Roy Harper and reformed Poison Ivy. What was more shocking was when we learned that another superhero was responsible for the deaths, although the massacre for them was not intentional. Originally, the murderer was actually believed to be either Booster Gold or Harley Quinn, but it was later revealed that Wally West, who was also one of the suspected dead at the time, was the one responsible, and that his trauma had caused him to lose control of the Speed Force, which caused the energy blast that killed everyone. Number 3. Bucky Barnes. I don't think anyone would have expected Captain America's sidekick Bucky to have been killed, especially because originally in the continuity he wasn't. Both he and Cap had continued to fight on after the war, but it was later retconned that this wasn't actually the true heroic duo and that they had actually gone missing during the end of World War II. Cap was then recovered, but we would later learn via flashbacks to World War II events of Bucky's death and how he had gone MIA while he was working with Cap. Bucky's suspected death was a surprising revelation and became known as one of the irreversible deaths in comics. That is until the early 2000s when Ed Brubaker, in another shocking twist, brought Bucky back, revealing he'd been alive this whole time and giving us the brilliant Winter Soldier. While the death of kid sidekick Bucky Barnes was shocking, discovering he was actually alive was even more so. Number 2. Death of Wolverine. While we knew that Wolverine's healing factor was beginning to fade due to a viral infection that was plaguing Logan, he was also one of Marvel's most popular characters. Wolverine was such a big character at this point in 2014 after years of being one of the most iconic X-Men and tons of animated and live action films only adding to his popularity. No one expected that Marvel would actually want to wish him ill. And yet, in September of 2014, the death of Wolverine began, which saw Wolverine hunted down by his enemies thanks to a bounty that had been placed on his head by Viper. In the end, it's actually revealed that the founder of Weapon X, Dr. Abraham Cornelius, is behind the plot to capture Wolverine. During the fight with Cornelius, Wolverine finds himself covered in liquid adamantium. This hardens around him, and due to his healing factor not working at the time, he suffocates and dies. Number 1. Death of Superman. The Death of Superman was a crossover story that was meant to shock readers and show them that the invincible Superman they'd come to know over the years wasn't quite as invincible as they maybe thought. Death of Superman was an event that began near the end of 1992 and took place over the course of what was almost a full year in real time, ending in October 1993. The idea for the story involving Superman's death actually came out of a passing joke. While brainstorming ideas for replacement stories for the story of Lois and Clark getting married, which DC decided to postpone, Jerry Ordway suggested they should just kill him. Sales for the Superman series had actually recently begun to drop off, and this joke quickly became the replacement plot for the wedding story, hoping it would remind people of Superman's importance. Number 10. Quicksilver. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Quicksilver was introduced and killed off in the same movie. In Age of Ultron, we meet Pietro and his sister Wanda, who received their powers through experimentation. While Quicksilver is a mainstay in the comics and fairly well known, and is also a popular character, often considered one of the fastest former mutants around, though maybe not quite as fast as Northstar, his long time standing as Wanda's sassy twin brother did not protect him in the MCU. Quicksilver was taken out by a hail of bullets that he couldn't run fast enough to stop. Instead of allowing the bullets to hit their targets, which would have been the very mortal Hawkeye and an innocent Sokovian child, he instead sacrificed himself and died. This is why the Avengers need a healer in their party, I'm just saying. Number 9. Bucky Barnes. But this time we are talking about Bucky Barnes as Captain America. Bucky was currently standing in as Cap during the Fear Itself event, and it was during a fight with Sin, who is currently Scotty at the time, that Barnes seemed to pass away. The passing was tragic, dramatic, and unexpected. Of course, we would learn in later issues of the Fear Itself main event series that Bucky was actually saved by Nick Fury's Infinity Formula, which revived him, and as such he was not in fact dead. But he decided to keep his resurrection a secret, letting everyone else believe he was dead, going underground for a time and returning once more to his Winter Soldier mantle. At least he had Black Widow to keep him company. Number 8. Hank Pym. While we all expected that Ultron would be the downfall of Hank, as the AI was likely one of his biggest mistakes and probably one of his biggest regrets, we were still caught off guard when we realized the Hank Pym we'd known had ceased to exist after merging with Ultron. Originally during the Rage of Ultron story, when these two merged, it was thought that Hank still existed within the being known as Ultron Pym's consciousness. This was also after he'd just returned. Hank had actually been believed dead in a previous event when facing the enemy known as the Beyonders, but it seemed Hank returned only to die again while facing Ultron, dying the moment he was forced to merge with his creation. What's even more surprising is he hasn't been seen since, and it's been like 5 years, so there's a good chance that this death could remain permanent. Number 7. Green Arrow. During the CW-verse Infinite Crisis event, Green Arrow died sooner than expected, shocking fans. Fans of the Arrowverse likely expected the death would be coming at them, as it had been foreshadowed previously, but what they didn't expect was that Oliver Queen, played by Stephen Amell, would die so soon into the event. He died within the first part of the event, shocking many. The fact that the death came as a surprise was just what the network wanted. Fans expected Oliver Queen to die, they reasoned, so why not catch them off guard with their timing? And so they did just that. I mean, it was also just shocking in general that they decided to kill off and end the show that started the CW/DC verse, the Arrowverse, which is still going on and is still often referred to as the Arrowverse, despite Arrow ending. But I guess they had a good 8-season run. Number 6, Batman. Usually when Batman dies, it's in a way that seems very non-final. He'll fall into a pit or go MIA and be presumed dead, or he'll get terribly injured, but manage to recover somehow. When you compare his standard deaths to the one that he suffered in Final Crisis, it's easy to understand why it appeared to be so shocking. In Final Crisis, he was basically mummified by Darkseid, who attacked Batman with his Omega beams after Batman managed to wound him. It was bad. Superman managed to recover Bruce's body, which basically just looked like a skeleton. This was Batman at his most dead. The most dead I feel like that we'd seen maybe ever, leaving people to wonder how Batman would even recover from this. Of course, sure as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, he did return, though the explanation for him returning was so bad and strange. It was almost more shocking than his death. Number 5, Hulk. In Civil War II, Bruce Banner and the Hulk were put to rest for good. Bruce no longer wanted to be plagued by his Hulk form and so took a few measures to make sure this would never happen again. After Amadeus Cho helped his friend Banner by taking away his burden and transferring all Bruce's gamma radiation into himself. To make sure that he never again transformed into the big green giant, Bruce had an arrowhead constructed made of gamma-enriched vibranium, basically making his own version of a silver bullet. He entrusted the arrowhead to his friend and teammate Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye. Although Banner had not turned green or had an episode in some time, when Inhuman Ulysses predicted that it would come to pass and would cause massive deaths, Hawkeye did not hesitate and swiftly executed Bruce before he had a chance to transform. Of course, it's probably them chasing him down and trying to catch him that made him transform in the first place, so that prediction, who knows. However, this was the end of the Incredible Hulk, but it would lead to the beginning of the Immortal Hulk that everyone has come to love. Number 4, Kitty Pryde. Captain Kate, as she currently prefers to be called, or I guess I should say preferred, recently had a very shocking end to her character. What's more, although all mutants can pretty much return whenever needed due to the 5 merging their powers to resurrect any fallen mutant, Captain Kate has not even been able to set foot on Krakoa, which for some reason doesn't seem to recognize her as a mutant, cutting her off from her friends. During Marauders, Kate was betrayed by none other than Sebastian Shaw, and it was revealed that, like the portals, Kate was unable to phase through Krakoan plant life, leaving her and Lockheed swimming with the fishes, Kate appearing to drown while tangled up in Krakoan roots, and leaving fans wondering when or if they'd ever see her return. Number 3, Cable. In a surprising turn of events, Cable killed Cable during the miniseries Extermination. The death of older Cable came about when both he and young Cable disagreed on how best to avoid a catastrophic future event. Older Cable aimed to avoid the catastrophic future by showing the younger X-Men responsible the error of their ways, whereas younger Cable believed they just needed to be straight up eliminated to prevent the events from taking place. Young Cable believed his older self had become weak and soft, and so killed him. It was also pretty crazy that the issue in which old Cable died was also the issue in which young Cable first appeared, though we wouldn't actually even find out till the end of the issue that old Cable's murderer was actually his younger self, leaving many fans shocked that a younger Cable was appearing to take the place of the established, grizzled, and well-loved older version. People are still, I feel like, kind of shocked by it. Even today. Number 2, Black Widow. There was a point when I definitely saw this death running headlong at us, but I was hoping, like almost everyone, that there could be another way. Please, there's gotta be another way. Of course, there wasn't. In the MCU, Black Widow chose to sacrifice herself in order to recover the Soul Stone, which the Avengers needed to rebuild the Infinity Gauntlet, reverse the effects of the snap, and save basically 50% of the universe, including their other colleagues, friends, and fellow heroes who had perished. We knew something would have to be sacrificed to get that Soul Stone, because we saw that before. We knew it was coming, and yet it still didn't hurt or surprise us any less when it did. Especially considering that it seems like this is a permadeath for Black Widow in the MCU, and that there will be likely no way of bringing her back. She died before she even got her own movie. That's pretty shocking. Number 1. Wasp. A lot of deaths in Ultimatum were shocking, mostly because they were so permanent, but also because a lot of them were pretty gruesome. We talked about another of Janet Van Dyne's death on part 1 of this list from the main continuity, but the one from the Ultimate line, more specifically Ultimatum, was one of her most shocking deaths ever because of how gruesome it was. Here, Janet dies and then is eaten by the Blob. And just FYI, it wasn't like she was small at the time and he like just accidentally swallowed her or something. This was gruesome. Like, I'm gonna eat you life-size type of thing. Like, I'm gonna literally, your guts or you know what I mean. One of the reasons why Ultimates existed, of course, was to be the darker, more shocking alternate world to Marvel's usually more bright and optimistic main continuity, so I guess they succeeded there.
Number 10. Nightcrawler. Kurt Wagner's death was a pretty heartbreaking one, dying in an incredibly fitting way, at the hands of his own teleportation. When Bastion is targeting Hope Summers, Nightcrawler jumps to defend her. Predicting the teleportation, Bastion sticks out his arm and Nightcrawler impales himself on it. In a last effort, Nightcrawler manages to teleport to safety, saving Hope, but he dies soon after. Now, this death was really important because although Nightcrawler is eventually resurrected, his being in heaven was instrumental in Azazel's siege of heaven, which was a pretty major plot point. Number 9. Peter Parker. The death of Peter Parker was as shocking as it was tragic. In Amazing Spider-Man number 700, Parker was defeated by Dr. Octopus and killed. After switching bodies with Peter, Doc Ock kills him and swears to continue his legacy as a hero, becoming the superior Spider-Man. While later issues explain that Parker wasn't exactly dead, the apparent death was incredibly shocking to readers. Doc Ock later learns that Peter isn't quite dead, still residing in the back of his own mind, and eventually relinquishes control of his body back to Peter when he realizes that being a hero isn't all it's cracked up to be. Number 8. Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel's death was a big one for a number of reasons. It was one of the first major superhero deaths, and it was one of the most human deaths a hero has had since he died from cancer. After being exposed to the malignant toxins of Compound 13, Captain Marvel developed cancer that ended up claiming his life, dying in bed surrounded by his comrades. It's a pretty emotional death, and it was quite a shift from the previous superhero deaths that were mostly in battle. I think it was really important to show that heroes are still people. You know, they don't always die in glorious combat. Sometimes things happen in life that are outside of your control, even if you're a superhero. There's definitely a lesson in that. Number 7. Rorschach. When you view the world purely in black and white, it's only a matter of time before you get yourself killed, and Rorschach did just that. After learning about Ozymandias' plan to essentially scare the people of Earth into working together, Rorschach's dichotomous worldview doesn't allow him to keep his mouth shut about it, and forces Dr. Manhattan to destroy him. I love Rorschach as a character, and I think this was a really interesting way to kill him. His morality is put to the test, and he stands by his guns rather than bend his rules. Number 6. Jason Todd's Robin. This one was one of the least surprising to fans, but pretty shocking after the fact. As a result of a vote by fans with a tally of 5,343 to 5,271, Jason Todd's fate was sealed. He was to die. In A Death in the Family, Todd is captured by the Joker and brutally beaten with a crowbar. As he waits, beaten and bruised, for Batman to save him, he's blown up by one of Joker's bombs in a really emotional moment. While he is not the coolest or most powerful hero on this list, his death was particularly important because it brought about his rebirth as the Red Hood, who is awesome. Plus, I actually played Jason Todd in a short film, so I'm kind of biased on this one. Number 5. Charles Xavier. Professor X was one of the most significant characters in the X-Men universe. Acting as a mentor and father figure for countless mutants, he showed all the virtues you'd expect from a hero. His death was super tragic, particularly since it came at the hand of one of his favorite students, Cyclops. In Avengers vs. X-Men, Cyclops is struggling to find where his allegiance lies. As Xavier tries to push him away from the Phoenix and to return to the good path, Cyclops vaporizes him in a fit of rage, thus submitting to the Phoenix. While this wasn't the end of the Professor's story, it was horrible to see him killed by one he had helped and trusted so much. Number 4. The Flash. The death of Barry Allen was certainly an upsetting one to many fans. While attempting to defeat the Anti-Monitor on the planet Quard, which is the stupidest planet name ever, the Flash finds himself face to face with the cannon's antimatter energy core. In order to make the cannon self-destruct, the Flash does what he does best: runs really fast. Unfortunately, he ran too quickly and he ends up disintegrating. Now, this incredible sacrifice certainly paid off, saving countless people on infinite Earths, and it was a fittingly heroic end to this popular hero. Number 3. Wolverine. And this is one of the coolest and most heroic deaths ever. After a long life thanks to his healing factor, Logan finds himself weakened by a virus that halts his healing abilities. As he finds himself less and less capable of his usual mayhem, he learns that Dr. Cornelius, the creator of Weapon X program, has ordered his assassination. While hunting Cornelius down, Logan discovers that the scientist plans to test even more innocent people by adding adamantium to them. Logan tears open the vats of adamantium to stop it being used on the people, but is covered in the liquid metal as a result. He suffocates and dies, but not before stabbing Cornelius, finally getting vengeance. What a boss. Number 2. Batman. We've all seen the image from Final Crisis number 6 of a destroyed Batman being carried in Superman's arms. This came as a huge shock for comic book fans everywhere, as everyone thought Batman was just too cool to die. But when he faced up against Darkseid, we learned that even the Dark Knight can fall. In his final confrontation, Batman fires a Radion bullet at Darkseid, the same bullet that killed Orion, and wounds the villain. But moments later, Batman is killed by Darkseid's Omega beams. Thankfully, by the end of the story, we learn that Bruce is not killed, but in fact sent back in time by the Omega beams, but it was a jarring thing to see the dead body of the world's greatest detective. Number 1. Superman. Of course. Probably the biggest shock of all was when the seemingly unbeatable Man of Steel was killed. Even though the comic was titled The Death of Superman, readers didn't quite believe that it could possibly be true, but it was. For a while at least. After a long, incredibly hard battle, Superman and Doomsday put all their energy into one last attack, which leaves both mortally wounded. Superman dies in perhaps the most fitting way possible, in Lois's arms after defeating the ultimate enemy. Thankfully, Superman was not actually dead, he was just recovering in stasis in the time that he was gone, and he returns with some pretty luscious locks later on. Number 10. Green Arrow. Ever the ladies' man, Oliver Queen met an untimely end at the hand of a pretty lady, and also at his own hand. After being tricked to insert his hand into a dead man switch device, he's left on a plane with explosives with few options. If he removes his hand, the bomb explodes. Superman arrives with his sexy flow, offering a number of options before determining that he'll have to amputate Oliver's arm so he can escape the inevitable blast. But instead of allowing his arm to be amputated, Oliver removes his hand, causing the plane to explode. This death kind of pissed me off. It was just so unnecessary. With all the science and technology available, he could definitely get a new arm put on to continue his heroics. And even if not, it's better to be alive and unable to fight crime than dead and also unable to fight crime. Number 9. Colossus. The death of Colossus was as heroic as it was heartbreaking. With the legacy virus wreaking havoc across the globe, it was clear that a cure had to be made. Hank McCoy had finally synthesized a cure for the virus, but realized that in order for the cure to be activated, a mutant needed to sacrifice themselves by using their power and dying as a result. This was deemed unacceptable by Beast, and he set it aside with hopes of coming up with a safer version. But Colossus, whose sister Illyana had died from the legacy virus, couldn't stand the thought of standing by while others died. So he broke into Beast's lab and activated the cure, dying to save countless lives. This was a really powerful moment. It was an incredibly fitting way for the honorable and self-sacrificing Metal Man. Number 8. Punisher. This one was tough because the Punisher is one of my faves. When Norman Osborn started the SHIELD replacement Hammer, taking the mantle of Iron Patriot, the Avengers were stuck in hiding. But Frank Castle wasn't cool with that, and he took matters into his own hands. After a failed assassination attempt on Norman Osborn, the head of Hammer, Wolverine's son Daken was sent to kill the Punisher, and Castle just got wrecked. Daken basically toyed with him, cutting off limb after limb, ending with a pile of Punisher being kicked into a gutter. It was pretty shocking and really sick. Number 7. He-Man. That's right, He-Man. In the amazing He-Man Thundercats crossover, some pretty serious shit went down, but it was pretty cool. The first issue started out with a bang. Prince Adam was stabbed right in the chest by Mum-Ra, the Ever-Living, who stole the power sword from him. Luckily, Adam was able to transform into He-Man since technically he was touching the sword, and as He-Man he survived the wound. But it wasn't over, because who should arrive to ruin the day? Skeletor.
A lot of good you are, Beast Brain.
Skeletor managed to get his hands on the power sword, and after gaining mystical powers from consuming Mum-Ra's ashes, he was able to call upon the power of Grayskull. And when the power left He-Man, he fell unresponsive because of his wounds. The Thundercats ended up defeating Skeletor, but by the time they got back, they found that the seemingly unstoppable Prince Adam was dead. Thankfully, he was resurrected in He-Man Thundercats number 4 a month later, but it was a pretty scary month for the He-Man fans, even if we didn't really think he'd stay dead. Number 6. Krypto the Superdog. That's right, you're about to hear about a dog dying. Get ready for some My Dog Skip level of sadness. When the Eradicator, a servant of General Zod, programmed to absorb the spirits of Kryptonians, tried to inhale Jonathan Kent, Krypto was having none of that. While Superman was frozen in surprise, Krypto leapt to defend Clark's son, dying to save Jonathan. In honor of Krypto's sacrifice, Jonathan attached the dog's cape to his jacket and became Superboy. This was a super tragic story, made even worse because it's a dog dying. But on the bright side, Krypto did come back. When Superman was absorbed and then burst out of the Eradicator, he managed to pull the pooch out of the baddie. Now that's satisfying. Number 5. The Wasp. The Ultimatum story arc was pretty devastating for many fans, with a plethora of surprising and gruesome deaths of many favorite heroes. Perhaps the most messed up of these was the death of the Wasp, because she fought the Blob and he ate her. It sounds kinda lame, but when you actually see the panels of the comic, it is freaking nightmare inducing. And the only thing that helps with this is that vengeance was pretty swift, with Hank Pym going Giant Man and biting the Blob's head off. But still, it was freaky. Number 4. Superwoman Lois Lane. This one was quite the shocker because it happened so early in her time as Superwoman. Following Superman's death, bolts of energy burst from him and entered both Lois Lane and Lana Lang, granting them incredible power. Lois gains similar powers to Superman, while Lana gains the ability to convert sun's energy into blasts. But unfortunately, while the pair are investigating Lex Luthor's secret research on some sort of bizarro Superwoman, Lois is killed, disintegrating into a pile of ash. Which was kind of a piss off for a lot of fans, but was super shocking. Interestingly, she seemed to have a moment of revelation as she dies, seeming to see Clark and understanding everything. So something tells me we haven't seen the last of Lois Lane. Number 3. Ultimate Doctor Strange. In yet another gruesome death from the Ultimatum event, we saw Doctor Strange defeated by Dormammu in a pretty messed up way. In the confusion of the events, Dormammu takes the opportunity to attack Doctor Strange in the Sanctum Sanctorum. He basically wraps Doctor Strange's cloak around him so tightly that his head explodes. Like, it's insane. If it wasn't shocking enough to see Doctor Strange die, the imagery of the death, like so many others in the Ultimatum story arc, was just absurdly horrifying. And awesome. Number 2. Superboy. Connor Kent was, unbeknownst to him, a clone of a combination of Clark Kent and Lex Luthor. When he learned this, it sent him reeling and left him in a terrible place, leading up to the Infinite Crisis event. With the knowledge that he could be turned into a sleeper agent for Lex Luthor, Superboy continued to fight the good fight, while the Earth was under attack by Superboy Prime and Alexander Luthor, the insane alternate reality versions of Superboy and Lex. After seeing several Teen Titans teammates die at the hand of Superboy Prime, Connor figures out a way to use Prime's power against him, but the resulting destruction killed Connor in the process. While this was horribly sad, his last words were amazing. When told that he had saved the Earth, he said, "I know, isn't it cool?" It's just perfect. Number 1. The Hulk in Old Man Logan. This one was really sick. Old Man Logan had some of the best art I've ever seen, and the battle between the Hulk and Logan was definitely the highlight for me. After Logan's family is slaughtered by the Banner clan, he goes out to kick butt and take names, and he's really not that concerned with names. He finds the Hulk, who's leading a group of freaky cannibals, and the two fight, with Logan being promptly eaten by the hulking beast. However, he regenerates in the Hulk's stomach and ends up clawing his way out. It's seriously awesome and probably one of the most satisfying deaths ever.